What is your position on U.S. drone strikes in the covert wars and surveillance the U.S. is engaged in both nationally and internationally? Are you aware of the number of civilian deaths resulting from this type of illegal warfare? Are you willing to advocate for changing these policies?
So, there is a role for drones. It is a very effective surveillance tool. But once it is used in a manner that is killing civilians, and we have killed hundreds upon hundreds of civilians, it becomes much more problematic. It's also problematic in the relationships we have with countries that are already tenuous, Pakistan being the most obvious example. The restriction on drones has not been an issue that has really had much evaluation in Congress, I must admit, and we need to do more. To really answer that question completely, I would want to make sure we have a hearing on that issue to appreciate and have the Joint Chiefs of Staff and others come and testify before us as to what's the value, how does the value outweigh the harm, if in fact that is the case.
Why, amid all the rancor about the budget and the fiscal cliff, is the threat of reducing entitlements of Social Security and Medicare exist when both are separately assessed and dispersed outside the budget?
You know, the term entitlement is actually an offensive term.
Yes,
I don't like using that term because people have paid in Social Security and they have paid into Medicare. Now, having said that, both systems have in the future problems for their survival. Social Security, though, has a $2.7 trillion surplus. $2.7 trillion surplus. Now, over the course of a number of years, that will shrink. And when it shrinks, if we don't do something about it, the average person will get about 3/4 of what they're getting now in Social Security benefits. Because there are fewer people working today for every person on Social Security. I'm part of the baby boom generation. There's 10,000 of us retiring every day. Social Security, when it was first designed, anticipated a life expectancy that we far exceed. So we either have to change the actual contributions made into Social Security, restrict how much money we give out to fix it. Now, it is a very, very important component of our society. Before Social Security was created, the percentage of people in poverty from the senior community was among the highest. We don't want to go here. So how do you fix Social Security? It's a real simple fix. Right now, you pay into Social Security for the first $113,000 you make. After the $113,000, you don't put any more money into Social Security, and neither does your employer. If you just lifted that cap and paid a Social Security tax on your entire income, that would make sure that Social Security was solvent to the year 2070. So there's no reason not to do that. It means that the employer and the employee would have to continue to contribute, but they already do that for Medicare taxes. You are taxed on your entire income for Medicare benefits. Now, the real rub for us all is not Social Security. It's Medicare. And we fix Medicare in a number of ways. You know, the first thing that it's important for us to appreciate is the money you contribute to Medicare only pays a small percentage of the benefit that is received. Medicare, when it was first created, was there for in-hospital care. So your premium typically, your payroll tax, goes towards the payment of hospital care. When the prescription drug benefit was created under President Bush, what did Congress do in its infinite wisdom? It tied its own hands in negotiating discounts on prescription drugs. Now, what were they thinking? Truly, what were they thinking? They negotiate discounts for the Veterans system. Veterans Administration is a 2/3 discount on prescription drugs. When I was in the state legislature in California, I worked with Medi-Cal because we were negotiating big discounts for the Medi-Cal population in prescription drugs. So, that's another area where we can help fix the Medicare system. But really, the way we fix the Medicare system is by stopping a model of fee-for-service. Most healthcare in this country is not provided in a fee-for-service model anymore. It's what's called capitated healthcare. You get paid as a hospital, as a physician, as a healthcare provider, a certain amount of money to provide all the healthcare for a specific person. And that helps keep the costs down. But we don't do that in the Medicare system for the most part. For the most part, it's fee-for-service. So there is an incentive to overprescribe, whether it's a service or a procedure. And we have found by funding the Medicare fraud program by a healthy amount, I think it was $300 million in the last fiscal year, it was very effective at getting out the cheats. And the cheats include, the purveyor of medical durable medical equipment, physicians, the lawyers, the companies owning certain kinds of the MRIs and the like, where they come to you and they say, hey, we'll lease this to you and for X number of hours, and then you'll make all this money. And so there's this incentive to send you for a CAT scan or an MRI because they booked this much time at the MRI. So those are the kinds of things we have to fix in the Medicare system to give it the longevity it needs. And then the baby boomers, which I'm one of, have to be realistic. You're not going to like this part of my conversation. Have to be realistic about the end of life. 1/4 of the Medicare dollars is spent in the last year of life. Now, I just buried my 2 parents over the last 3 years. My mother was vibrant, involved in the community into her 92nd year. She was teaching adult education at full strength. She was terrific. She had lots of, issues, carotid arteries, high blood pressure, all those things. She was taking maybe 40 pills towards the end of her life. She gets hospitalized. She's in the ICU at Peninsula Hospital for 1 month. And in the course of that, the cardiologist comes to me and says, I think we need to do angioplasty. I said, she's 92, she's had a very good life. I know this is going to be an expensive procedure. I don't know that it's going to extend her life that much. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this intervention? And he looked at me kind of stunned because, I'm thinking of all the numbers about end of life and how much it's costing, right? And my mom was a depression baby. She stood in food lines as a kid. But to her, Medicare was a free benefit. So the doctor says to me, why don't we go ask her? Well, she was going to live forever, right? So she says, yeah, I'm going to do it. Now, if she was told it was going to cost $1,000, I can guarantee you she wouldn't have agreed. But nonetheless, and it costs much more than that, I might point out. How much doctors would an angioplasty cost? About $15,000. Okay, so she had the angioplasty. She came and lived with us the last 8 months of her life. They were okay months, but it did passed away. My father had prostate cancer. And in the end, I took him to the hospital for a bone scan. Found out that it had metastasized to his bone. I slept with him at the hospital that night. He was in pain. He was on morphine. I said, you know what? We're getting out of here. 6 a.m. that morning, I said to the nurse, I'm putting him on hospice. We're going home. I took him home. The nurse said he probably had 4 to 6 weeks. He died 5 days later. So those are just my personal stories. But I've got to say, as baby boomers, we have got to recognize that if we want this to be here for everyone, when it comes to that point, we've got to really be clear about what we need by what kinds of interventions we want to take, and then be realistic about it. Okay, it was a long answer. I apologize.
We're going to shift back to the guns for several questions. When armed burglars break into your house at 3 a.m., how will you protect your loved ones if you are unarmed?
Well, that's presuming that my family doesn't have a gun. Actually, my husband has guns at our cabin in Michigan, but we don't have guns in our home here. I think that everyone who feels they need to have a gun to protect themselves at 3 a.m. from the burglar that's going to come into their home has a right to have that gun. It's a personal decision that one makes.
What proof can you provide that those who wish to harm the law-abiding will honor and obey any gun control law you pass?
What proof do we have that there isn't fraud being committed in this country on every number of levels? I mean, for all the laws we put on the books for all the things that we want to prevent, we're not necessarily always successful. We do know that this country is the most gun-violent country in the world. We do know that in countries like Australia, where after they had a 1996 mass shooting, the Prime Minister took steps to buy back guns in that country and to put laws on the books. They have not had one since then. We're not good. You know, I know we have different opinions in this room as to the ownership of guns. We're never going to change the fact that each of you has the right, if you choose to exercise it, to own a gun, to own a number of guns, to own them legally, and to use them in recreation or to protect yourselves.
Diane Feinstein gets her way.
True.
So, let's respect everyone's opinions. All right, next question.
Okay. How are you going to help us get Citizens United overturned?
We all should be concerned about that Supreme Court decision because it really is taking us to an oligarchy. It's really putting a disproportionate power and control in the hands of a very few people who can really determine elections and do so without identifying themselves. And we saw a good part of it this last election cycle. That decision is only overturned by a Congress that is willing to take it on or by an initiative that is taken by the people through the amendment process. Now, at the very least, though, shouldn't we know who's making these contributions? So the House, when Leader Pelosi was the Speaker of the House, passed a bill called the Disclose Act, or required anyone who made a contribution to disclose their status, who they were, where their money came from. That got to the Senate and it wasn't taken up. So the first step would really be to pass that Disclose Act. So at least we have disclosure. We do have disclosure here in California, but from a national perspective.
What are you doing to reduce military spending?
What am I doing to reduce military spending? I've been on the Armed Services Committee for a little over just about a year. I was pretty surprised when I got to the committee because we were taking up what's called the National Defense Authorization Act. And all of the four-star generals were there to speak on their particular parts of the budget. And I was pretty astonished at the questioning by my colleagues because it was almost like they were saying, don't you need more money? Don't you need more money for this program? Aren't you a little short here? And then I realized the committee that I serve on, for the most part, is made up of members that have bases in their district or have large defense contractors in the district. So a lot of it's about employment, about jobs. And while I do have a few defense contractors in my district, I really feel that being smart about the defense budget is part of how we're going to get out of this morass with the economic slowdown, with sequestration, with balancing the budget, and dealing with the debt. So, what have I done personally? Well, I've gotten a couple of amendments into the NDAA. There is this one ship called the LCS, Literal Combat Ship. It's supposed to be great. We're going to have 53 of them. They're going to cost $36 billion. They're going to be able to come closer to shore. They're smaller, except there's one problem. The stern door doesn't close properly, and it takes in water. Seriously. So I asked for this last budget to have the GAO, the General Accounting Office, do an investigation. Should we move forward with this? We built a couple of beta ships, but you're going to build another 35 of them, 50 of them, how many ever? And if they're not going to work, we shouldn't be doing it. All right, that's fine. The Air Force just announced it was abandoning a computer system after they had spent over $1 billion. $6 billion program. They had been told over the last few years that there were problems with it, but they kept it. We have got to have the willingness to put the brakes on projects that don't work. And I intend to be that voice in the Armed Services Committee moving forward.
Will there be more federal money allocated to California's public schools, K through 12 in particularly?
As most of you know, the education of our youngsters comes mostly from the state. The federal government plays a role when you get to higher education, in Pell Grants, in student loan programs, in research dollars for universities, and the like. The role that the federal government plays in K through 12 education for the most part is around providing funding for special education. But having said that, I'm going to tell you about a bill that I am co-authoring with a Republican colleague called the E-Fairness Marketplace Bill. And its impact on public education here in California would mean at a very minimum, another $800 million in public education. So what is this bill? And I tell you what this bill is, you're going to be blown away by how much money it's going to generate for education. The E-Fairness bill is about allowing states across the country to require internet retailers to collect sales tax at the time of purchase. Now, I know every one of you shops on the internet, right? And most of you pay your personal use tax on your franchise tax return, right? 99% of Americans don't pay that sales tax that they are required to pay, even though they purchased it on the internet. So what's happened is that, the small businesses become showrooms to the internet. It is estimated that here in California, that's a loss of sales tax revenue, $2 billion. So that's how you get to that $800 million. What's interesting though, the state negotiated a deal with Amazon. So Amazon is now collecting sales tax here in California and in a few other states. And I met recently with some of the Amazon executives because I'm working with them on this federal legislation. I said, well, tell me, how's it going? It had been operational for 1 month, I think September to October of this year. And they already had reached 2/3 of what they thought would be generated in sales tax revenue to the state. That was in 1 month, so it didn't have the Christmas rush. It wasn't a full year. So I think in California, that $2 billion figure is low.
How do you feel about the indefinite detainment aspect of the NDAA, parentheses, that any U.S. citizen can be detained and held indefinitely if the president deems you are a terrorist threat?
Well, I mean, that is in fact the law right now.
Unconstitutional.
The question is, what is the question? Whether or not it's going to be,
How do you feel about it?
how do I feel about it? I feel that if we're going to detain someone, we have to charge them with something, we have to try it. That's fundamental to our justice system.
Okay.
How much more time do you have? Should we start taking?
About 5 minutes and then we'll be open mic.
Open mic?
We haven't talked about the environment at all, so I'm going to change gears to that. What legislation are you supporting to inhibit fracking both in California and nationwide? What is your position on the Keystone Project, and how do you see this project in any positive light?
So I'm not carrying anything or co-sponsoring anything on fracking at the moment. I do think that we owe it to ourselves to make sure that fracking that is done, it is not having a deleterious effect on our water system and our environment in general. In terms of the Keystone Pipeline, I think it should be operational as long as it is safe, as long as it's not environmentally hindering our country. Now, I can tell you, we already know that it leaks, and that's got huge problems for us. So as that moves forward, we've got to address the fact that we've got this whole oil coming from Canada that's then being pumped through our country and then leaking out of pipes in our country. And I think that's got serious problems that we have to address. Yeah, so I'd like to be able to have some of our physicians who are here with us say a few words on guns from a medical perspective. So let me introduce to you Dr. Schuler and Dr. Schauser. Is that correct? Oh, I'm sorry. Come on up and you can say a few words, please.
My name's Elton Schuler. I work at Seton Medical Center in Jelly City. I've been for 30 years. I've had personal experience with treating victims of gun violence over the past 30 years. I've had personal experience in my family. I had an uncle I lost when I was a couple of years old, so I never knew him. He was a victim of gun violence. From a professional standpoint, I think the most telling thing I can say is I trained at Los Angeles County Hospital back in the 80s, and I don't think I went 2 shifts in 3 years without seeing at least one person who had been shot. I saw dozens of people die. I was the one who had to tell their families that they had lost their family member. In the hallways at USC LA County Hospital, you see rows of young men, mostly in wheelchairs, ones who didn't get killed, who are paralyzed for life in wheelchairs as a result of injuries as a result from the gunshot they received. I had a friend of mine who I trained with who became director there. In the 90s, late 90s, when I was talking to him, they saw so many incidents of gun violence that the medics that went to Afghanistan and Iraq to be trained to deal with the victims of gun violence in a war were actually sent to USC LA County Hospital, because outside of a war zone, the only place they could see that kind of an injury was a hospital like USC. To me, that's unbelievable, because it is a war, it's just not a declared war. We're killing ourselves. And you don't have to work there for more than a month to realize that there's a war going on in the inner cities throughout the country. And that was just 3 years of my life, but it's something that stays with you forever.
How much of this do you see is due to drug prohibition?
Pardon me?
How much of this do you see is due to drug prohibition? Drug prohibition, the war on drugs?
I mean, the violence that we saw at USC was from the local neighborhoods, and that was gang violence, and a lot of that was drug-related, if that's your question. I mean, it was, you could stand, in the summertime, we used to go up to get some air on the rooftops, you would hear the gunshots in the neighborhood, which were blocks away, and you'd hear the sirens 2 minutes later, and you'd be getting the bodies 5 minutes later. So this was routine.
Same thing happened during alcohol prohibition.
Pardon me?
During alcohol prohibition, 1919 to 1933, same thing happened.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ed Littleton. I'm the medical director at San Mateo Medical Center. I am not anti-gun. I enjoy going to the range with friends. I don't hunt, but I have many family and friends who do. But I also have seen firsthand a lot of victims of gun violence. I went to another war zone in the country, and I trained at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. And then same story, different location. Day after day, more and more victims of gun violence. And one thing I would like to add, though, I think that part of this debate is, mental health. And I think that when we're looking at, protecting the right for, reasonable and responsible people to own guns, I think we also need to really step up as a nation our ability to screen and identify people who just really shouldn't.
Dr. Lipton mentioned mental health, and I really didn't address that very much. I have a goddaughter who's been teaching K through 3rd school, grade school in San Mateo County for probably 15 years. And she said something to me recently that really struck a chord. She says, every teacher who's teaching kindergarten through 3rd grade can identify the kids that are going to get in trouble.
In a what?
That you can identify the children that are going to get in trouble when they're quite young. And oftentimes it's because there aren't the interventions for these children that they need. And there isn't the intervention for these children because schools are strapped, and if they identify the child with a specific learning disability or emotional disability, and there's extra services that have to be provided to that child, more often than not, that money comes directly out of the general fund of the school. And so they tend to continue to just pass them from grade to grade. The children continue to recognize that they're falling farther and farther behind, and before you know it, they're out on the streets or not getting the kinds of resources or assistance they need through the psychiatric programs that exist. Yes, okay, we're going to do 15 minutes of open mic now, so
We have microphones along these sides of the
Sir,
church.
you go to the
If you could line up,
microphones.
please.
and I'll try and answer as many questions as possible. So go to the microphones.
Jackie, thank you.
Really? Okay, me too, actually.
I want to thank the doctor for bringing up the mental health issue. I have a friend down in San Francisco who cut off the head of a man. We knew he was mentally ill, but because of the laws, the civil rights laws, we could get no treatment. But another question I want to ask has to do with the Social Security system. And the problem is that, well, we say we paid for it. We did. But what happened is Congress and successive administrations, not content with appropriating and spending general revenue, chose to co-opt the payroll tax money, giving IOUs instead to maintain the facade of solvency and diverting the funds to general spending. This is why Social Security and Medicare are part of the deficit. Those IOUs are being cashed in now. That's part of the general budget. The Social Security and Medicare funds are way in debt because of those IOUs. And that money should not have been co-opted and spent. That was assessed as a payroll tax, and it also should not have been cut back for stimulus. If we want to spend money, we should appropriate it and not take money that's earmarked for a certain, that we put in for insurance purposes.
Okay, so you are right to a point, except that the money that was used from the trust fund is in T-bills, backed by the full faith and credit of the United States, and as long as we never don't lift the debt ceiling, we will be in good shape. But there's as much money owed to China as there is to the Social Security system. So I don't think we're going to default on either of those. In terms of the stimulus, I would totally agree with you. I thought it was a bad idea to roll back the payroll taxes, because interestingly enough, when we let them become restored, it was a tax increase. No, it wasn't a tax increase. It was your contribution to Social Security and Medicare that was being reinstated. So for 2 years, everyone got a gift from the general taxpayers and not having to pay those payroll taxes. It was done because economists said, and they believed that they were accurate, that by giving you more money in your pockets, it would be stimulative and people would spend the money and it would help the economy grow. But I think that's a mistake nonetheless. Yes?
President Obama currently claims, and Congress has now authorized this power, which was first claimed by President Bush, the right to unilaterally kill anyone in the world, anywhere, anytime, without any due process on his authority or say so that that person is involved in terrorism. I'm concerned that this country is sliding into a police state. I just saw a news item that a 2009 Nobel Peace Prize nominee reported talking to one of the military leaders in this country who told him that military leaders are being asked whether they would open fire on U.S. civilians if ordered to, and that those who don't go along with that are being quietly removed from their posts. There's a lot of disturbing things, and I really urge everyone to don't trust the mainstream media. Look on the internet and read stuff for yourself. And Congresswoman Speier, what are you going to do to oppose this dictatorial power that presidents are claiming to unilaterally murder people?
Very good. Very good, everybody.
I think that when you're dealing with issues around homeland security, there is authority granted to take action without, quote, due process. If you're suggesting that Osama bin Laden should have been brought back to the United States and tried, I think that would have been a fatal flaw. I want to make sure that people who are captured and are in detention get a trial. But if someone in a terrorist environment, we're in war in Afghanistan, we know that there are terrorist pockets throughout the Fatah region in Pakistan, and if they have intelligence to suggest this is someone who is in fact responsible for part of 9/11, President taking action, I think, in that kind of a setting, if there are no terrorists, it's something that he has the right to do.
U.S. citizens?
He was talking about U.S. citizens.
Thank you very much.
I'll talk to you later if I misunderstood your question. Yes.
take over. As we know, public education institutions are increasingly underfunded, downsized, and sometimes privatized. And the for-profit educational institutions are getting an increasing share of the education market. And this for-profit industry is having more and more influence in our government and in its lobbying campaigns, and it's getting influence in the accrediting agencies that accredit our public schools. And we see this happening at City College, and which is unfairly being threatened with closure, a wonderful City College that serves the community. What can be done to influence the limit of the for-profits? How can we protect our public educational institutions from unfair accrediting agencies?
Okay, I think you're asking a couple of questions here. For-profit institutions of higher learning are indeed for-profit. They're on the New York Stock Exchange. They're all about making a profit. They use a lot of our taxpayer dollars in accepting students for Pell Grants or student loans. They promise them the world and they don't offer results. Huge problem. One that I have attempted to address as it relates to our veteran population, because they were also trying to target veterans to come to their for-profit institutions, offering them careers at the end. Oftentimes what they would do is they would place them in a job for a month or two, pay for it, credit the company, and then the company would let them go. So there's a lot of games that have been played that really need to be addressed. They are a powerful force in Washington, and I'm trying to do my bit in terms of addressing that and reforming it through the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. In terms of City College, I don't believe it'll ever be shut down. I don't believe that will happen. It may come under a more elaborate conservatorship, might be taken over by another institution of higher learning for purposes of, bringing the costs in line with what the revenues are. But I do think that it's going to more than survive. It's been a tough time, and there have been some decisions that have been made over time that have not been consistent with sound higher education policy.